I came home from a month in northern Wisconsin with my two grandsons expecting to hear chickens before I even opened the truck door. That soft, noisy little chorus my girls always made around sunset, like they were gossiping about the whole neighborhood the second they heard my engine coming up the gravel road. Instead, all I heard was wind. Just wind, and somewhere off in the distance, a leaf blower whining like a mosquito. At first I honestly thought I'd pulled into the wrong driveway because my backyard looked naked. Empty. Wrong. Then I saw the splintered boards. Piles of broken cedar scattered across the grass, twisted rolls of chicken wire shoved near the fence line, feathers stuck in the mud after a week of rain. And right there, taped to my kitchen window with bright orange contractor tape, was a notice from the Fairwick Estates Homeowners Association. Livestock structure removed due to sanitation concerns and repeated noise complaints. Cleared for neighborhood compliance. Neighborhood compliance. I remember reading that line 3 times because my brain genuinely couldn't catch up to what my eyes were seeing. They hadn't just torn down my coop. They erased it, like it had never existed. And the thing that really got me wasn't even the money. It was that my husband built that coop 6 months before he died. Earl spent an entire fall hand-cutting every board himself out behind the barn with an old table saw that screamed loud enough to wake the county. Every nesting box had little carved initials underneath where nobody could see them except us. He used to joke those chickens lived better than we did. Truth is, after Earl passed, that coop gave me a reason to get out of bed most mornings. Funny how people who've never built a thing in their lives will look at something full of memory and call it a violation. Now, my property sat right at the entrance to Fairwick Estates, which used to be soybean fields before some developer from Atlanta bought the land and stuffed 70 identical houses onto it like plastic Monopoly pieces. My little farmhouse had been there since 1984. Fruit trees, vegetable garden, chickens, a rusty tire swing Earl refused to take down even after the grandkids got too old for it. That place had history. Fairwick had regulations. They had approved mailbox colors. They had seasonal wreath guidelines. I once got a letter because my grass was visually inconsistent with the subdivision entrance, which was funny considering my land wasn't even part of their HOA. But the people moving in there, most of them acted like the world started the day their closing paperwork went through. Thing is, not all of them were bad. A few years back, neighbors from the subdivision used to stop by every Saturday morning to buy eggs. Young couples mostly. Moms with toddlers. One guy named Ben used to bring his daughter over because she liked feeding cracked corn to the hens. Store eggs taste like refrigerator. She once told me, dead serious. Kid wasn't wrong. Even the HOA vice president back then, a woman named Denise Holloway, bought 24 every other week. Smiled to my face every single time too. You're such a blessing to this community, Mabel, she'd say while carrying off eggs in one of my old cartons. That's why the whole thing felt personal when I got back and saw the damage. Nobody knocked on my door. Nobody called. They waited until I was gone, then sent contractors onto my property like thieves in broad daylight. I stood in that backyard for maybe 20 minutes without moving, just staring at the wreckage while my grandson Tyler kept asking, "Grandma, where are the chickens?" I didn't even know how to answer him because honestly, I was wondering the same thing. Animal control later told me most of the flock had scattered into nearby woods when demolition crews started tearing things apart. A few were found dead by the roadside. One never turned up at all. And I'll tell you right now, something in me changed that afternoon. Not loud, not dramatic, just cold, calm, like a switch flipping somewhere deep down where grief turns into clarity. Because people like Denise Holloway always assume kindness means weakness. They mistake patience for permission. And standing there in the middle of those broken boards, holding one of Earl's carved nesting boxes in my hands, I realized Fairwick Estates had made a very expensive mistake. Now, if you've never dealt with an HOA board before, let me save you some time. Most of those people aren't evil, not really. They're bored. And bored people with a little authority can become dangerous fast because eventually they stop managing neighborhoods and start managing emotions. Denise Holloway especially had that problem. She was one of those women who smiled with every tooth showing while quietly trying to control the temperature of the entire room. Late 50s maybe, always wearing crisp white capri pants like she was headed to brunch at a yacht club instead of harassing retirees over trash can placement. Earl used to call her the clipboard queen. Honestly, he wasn't far off. About 2 years before the Coop incident, Denise started this whole campaign about modernizing the entrance corridor leading into Fairwick Estates. That corridor happened to include my property. She never said outright she wanted me gone, but you could hear it underneath every conversation. First it was suggestions. Maybe paint the barn. Then concerns. Some residents feel the chickens create an agricultural atmosphere. Agricultural atmosphere in rural Tennessee. Imagine that. Then came the passive-aggressive little warnings. Anonymous complaints about rooster noise even though I didn't own a rooster. Letters about odor violations despite the fact my coop was cleaner than half their garages. I ignored most of it because Earl taught me something years ago. Never wrestle with people who got too much free time. But standing in my destroyed backyard that afternoon, I suddenly started replaying every conversation Denise and I had ever had, and one memory hit me harder than the rest. About 8 months earlier, she'd stopped by during one of the neighborhood yard sales. She stood near the fence watching me load feed buckets while this tight little smile sat on her face. "You know, Mabel," she said, "eventually this whole area is going to transition. Progress always comes." I remember laughing because I thought she was talking about road expansion or something. "Honey," I told her, "I've lived here longer than the asphalt." She didn't laugh back. That should have told me everything. The next morning after I got home, I drove straight down to the county records office with a folder full of property documents Earl kept organized in an old tackle box. Earl trusted paperwork more than people. Best habit that man ever had. 3 hours later, sitting under fluorescent lights that made everybody look half dead, I found exactly what I was looking for. Easement agreements. Utility access records. Service routes. And there it was, plain as day. Fairwick Estates garbage trucks only access the subdivision through my private driveway because decades earlier the developer made a temporary arrangement with Earl while waiting for county approval on a secondary road entrance. Approval never happened. Then the developer sold the project, people moved in, years passed, and eventually everybody just acted like access through my property was permanent. Legally, though, it wasn't. The easement only covered emergency utility maintenance. Waste management access existed purely because Earl allowed it, which meant now I could stop allowing it. I remember sitting there in that little county office staring at the paperwork while this strange feeling settled over me. Not rage. Rage burns hot. This was colder than that. Cleaner. Like balancing a checkbook. By Monday morning, I was at Cooper Welding and Fence Supply ordering 2 steel posts and a commercial-grade chain barrier. The guy behind the counter asked if I was protecting farm equipment. Something like that, I told him. By Tuesday afternoon, the chain was installed across the gravel drive where the garbage trucks usually cut through toward the subdivision dumpsters. Heavy steel lock too. Bright red. Real dramatic-looking thing. I'll admit, maybe I enjoyed that part a little. Wednesday morning around 6:15, I sat on my porch with coffee waiting for the first truck. Right on schedule. Here comes this giant green Waste Pro garbage truck rumbling down County Route 8 before slowing to a stop in front of the chain. Driver leans out the window, stares at me, stares at the lock, then back at me again. "Morning," I said, sipping coffee like we were discussing weather. "Ma'am, I need access through here." "No, you don't," I said. "You'd like access." Poor guy looked exhausted already. Probably dealt with neighborhood nonsense every day of his life. "Dispatch says this is the subdivision route." "Dispatch can call me then." They did too. About 20 minutes later, while I was feeding the remaining hens, I'd managed to recover from nearby woods. Nice woman named Carla from Waste Pro, trying real hard to sound diplomatic. "Mrs. Whitaker, we understand there may be a dispute." "No dispute," I interrupted. "Private driveway. Access revoked." Silence. Keyboard clacking. Then, "Well, this route services 72 homes. Sounds inconvenient." She exhaled slow like somebody regretting career choices. "May I ask why access was revoked?" "Because your clients demolished my property while I was out of state." Another long silence. "Oh, yeah. Oh." By Thursday, the neighborhood Facebook page apparently looked like a war zone because my grandson Tyler showed me screenshots while trying not to laugh. People were furious. Photos of overflowing trash bins. Arguments about whose responsibility it was. One woman blamed immigrants somehow. Another demanded emergency county intervention because raccoons had gotten into her recycling. And right there in the middle of it all was Denise Holloway posting these long-polished HOA statements about ongoing access complications, while carefully avoiding any mention of the coop they'd destroyed. Coward move. Friday afternoon, Denise finally came to see me in person. Not alone either. She brought 2 board members and a lawyer wearing loafers so shiny they looked expensive enough to have their own insurance policy. They marched up my driveway like a funeral procession while I sat on the porch shelling peas. Denise spoke first. "Mabel, this has gone far enough." "That was quick," I said. "Usually takes the HOA at least 3 warning letters before anything's considered serious." One board member snorted before catching himself. Denise ignored it. "You're obstructing essential sanitation services to an entire residential community." "No," I said calmly. "I'm protecting private property. There's a difference." Then the lawyer stepped forward with this polished courtroom voice. "Mrs. Whitaker, if public health becomes compromised, the county can seek emergency legal remedies." I reached beside my chair and handed him copies of the easement documents. Watched his expression change halfway through reading them too. That little flicker lawyers get when they realize their clients forgot to tell them something important. Beautiful sight. Denise crossed her arms. "This retaliation is inappropriate." "Retaliation?" I laughed. "Denise, y'all tore down a dead man's handiwork while his widow was out of town." For the first time since arriving, her composure cracked just slightly. "We received complaints." "From who?" No answer. "Of course not. Because most complaints came from 3 HOA board families trying to boost property values before selling homes that summer. I found that out later through one of the residents who got tired of all the drama and started talking. The coop wasn't really about sanitation. It was about appearances. Investors had toured Fairwick recently, and apparently my little farm setup interfered with their precious luxury branding. Imagine destroying somebody's livelihood because chickens didn't match your brochure aesthetic. The lawyer finally cleared his throat. What exactly would resolve this situation? Now that was the moment everything shifted. Because up until then they still thought this was a tantrum, a negotiation. They hadn't realized yet that I was completely prepared to let their subdivision drown in garbage all summer if necessary. I set my bowl of peas down slowly and looked Denise dead in the eyes. "You can start by explaining where my chickens went. You ever notice how people get real quiet when they finally understand they're not in control anymore?" That porch went dead silent after I asked about my chickens. Even the lawyer stopped pretending to shuffle papers. Denise looked past me toward the backyard like maybe if she avoided eye contact long enough this whole thing would somehow reset itself. Finally she sighed and said, "Animal removal was handled by the contractor." "Contractor?" Like my hens were broken patio furniture. I stood up then, slow, knees popping louder than I wanted, and walked down off the porch until we were standing almost face to face. "Those birds had state registrations, Denise. 2 were heritage breeders worth more than your handbag." One of the board members actually coughed, trying not to laugh at that, which earned him a death stare from her sharp enough to peel paint. I kept going. "You people came onto private property without permission, destroyed agricultural infrastructure, scattered livestock, and somehow thought taping a notice to my window covered it." The lawyer finally jumped in. "Mrs. Whitaker, nobody's denying mistakes may have been made. Mistakes." I snapped. "A mistake is backing into somebody's mailbox. You hired demolition crews." For a second there, I honestly think Denise wanted to scream back at me. I could see it building behind her eyes. But then a breeze rolled through carrying the smell from the subdivision dumpsters down the hill behind them. And suddenly nobody had energy for pride anymore. That smell was brutal by then. Tennessee heat in July does ugly things to trash after 5 days. Residents were double-bagging garbage and still waking up to raccoons ripping through it overnight. Flies everywhere. Stray cats fighting under parked cars at 2 in the morning. One family apparently canceled an open house because buyers got out of their SUV, smelled the air, and immediately left without even touring the property. Fairwick Estates spent years trying to market itself as elevated country living, and now the whole place smelled like the back alley behind a seafood restaurant. By Sunday, local reporters started sniffing around too. Funny how quickly news crews appear once upper-middle-class neighborhoods start melting down publicly. A young reporter from Channel 4 interviewed me beside the broken remains of Earl's old coop, while cameras zoomed in on carved nesting boxes and scattered feathers. She asked if I felt guilty about the garbage situation. I told her, "I feel guilty my grandkids had to come home and learn adults can behave like this." That clip spread all over town. Monday morning, Denise came back alone. No lawyer. No board members. No fancy smile either. Just exhaustion. She stood at the edge of my porch holding a manila folder against her chest while I watered tomato plants. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. Funny thing was, I almost felt sorry for her then. Almost. She looked older somehow. Smaller. Turns out pressure from residents had gotten ugly over the weekend. Emergency HOA meetings. Threats of lawsuits. Homeowners demanding resignations. Waste management penalties piling up daily. One resident even contacted county commissioners asking why private agreements were allowed to control public sanitation access in the first place. Whole thing had become a circus. Denise sat down on the porch swing Earl built 20 years ago and rubbed her temples. "The board voted unanimously to offer full restitution," she said. "We'll rebuild the coop exactly as it was, replace your flock, compensate lost income, cover emotional damages." Emotional damages. Lord, corporate language really does suck the soul out of everything. I shut off the hose and leaned against the porch rail. "You still don't get it." She looked up tired. "Then help me understand." And honestly, part of me had been waiting for that question all week. "You thought because my house looked older and my life looked simpler, you could erase it without consequence," I said. "You saw chickens and gardens and figured none of it mattered because it didn't fit your image." Denise opened her mouth, then closed it again because deep down she knew I was right. "My husband built this place with his own hands," I continued. "Every tree out there has a story attached to it. You people came in treating history like clutter." Wind moved through the porch screens for a second. Somewhere out back, one of the recovered hens clucked softly from the temporary enclosure I'd built. Finally, Denise asked, "What do you want?" There it was. The real question. Not about garbage anymore. Not even about the coop. Respect has a price once people decide to ignore it long enough. I walked inside, grabbed the folder I'd prepared the night before, and handed it to her. She blinked reading the first page. $3,000 a month. Driveway access agreement, I said. Private commercial usage fee. Due on the 1st of every month. Miss a payment, chain goes back up. She stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Then she laughed once under her breath. Not amused either. More like somebody realizing the game ended 3 moves ago. "The residents are never going to agree to this." I shrugged. "Then I guess you'll better buy some air fresheners." 2 days later, they signed it. Every single board member. No negotiation. No lawsuit. No apology either, interestingly enough. Pride survives longer than common sense sometimes. The first check arrived by certified mail on August 1st at 9:14 in the morning. I remember because Tyler joked we should frame it. Instead, I used part of the money to build a new coop. Bigger this time. Stronger too. Cedar siding. Steel mesh. Motion lights. And above the doorway, I hung Earl's old wooden sign that somehow survived demolition with only one cracked corner. Whitaker Family Farm Fresh Eggs since 1987. Some residents from Fairwick still buy eggs from me now, believe it or not. Quietly, usually. They pull up in expensive SUVs pretending not to notice the driveway agreement sign near the gate. A few even apologized privately after the story spread around town. Denise never did. Last I heard, she sold her house 6 months later and moved to Arizona. Probably terrorizing cactus communities by now. But here's the thing that still keeps people arguing whenever this story comes up. Some folks think I went too far. They say punishing an entire neighborhood over one HOA board's decision was petty. Maybe they're right. Maybe 70 families shouldn't have suffered because a handful of people got arrogant. Then again, nobody in that subdivision complained when they were enjoying cheap fresh eggs every Saturday morning. Nobody spoke up while those contractors tore apart a dead man's handiwork either. Funny how silence feels harmless until consequences finally arrive at your own front door. So tell me honestly, what would you have done? Would you have unlocked the gate and let it go? Or made them remember your name every single month when that invoice showed up in the mail? And if you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare yourself, drop it in the comments because I swear, every neighborhood in America's got at least one Denise hiding behind a clipboard somewhere.